In Peru, there are ancient buildings which defy modern technology. How could inhabitants of ancient Peru build these wonders without having any modern know-how? They did provide an answer. They believed that gods transmitted their knowledge. The heritage of an evolved civilization with an extraordinary technology, today forgotten. More than a century has passed since the first finding, but the gusty winds of the Paracas Peninsula, about 250 kilometers south of Lima, have not removed traces of the giant drawing carved in the sand. It is called the Paracas Trident or Candelabrum. It seems that it was created by the Paracas culture, who inhabited this region between 300 BC and 200 AD. But this is just conjecture. In fact, the few stories which do mention it don't reveal the authors, and neither do they indicate its date of creation. No analyses are available to date a simple excavation in the sand, and no organic finds nearby were unearthed, like clothing, tools, or other finds, crucial for carbon-14 dating, which are normally associated with a place to define a more or less accurate date. Even its significance is uncertain. It was conjectured that it could be a sign pointing towards areas of the ancient empire like Cusco, Machu Picchu or Nazca. But when checked, it appeared that its central axis extends and ends directly in the Pacific Ocean. Others have conjectured that it could be a religious symbol, perhaps the Tree of Life, or the representation on Earth of a constellation, perhaps the Southern Cross. In any case, the almost 200 meters of the central vertical axis, the nearly 120 meters of the horizontal axis, and the 40-degree inclination seem devised to make it visible from a great distance. A signal, therefore, a sort of lighthouse. Arriving from the sea, in fact, it starts to be seen even more than 15 kilometers from the coastline. But arriving from the sky, it can be seen even sooner. According to research by Professor Zechariah Sitchin, one of the world's greatest scholars on Sumerian cuneiform writing and an expert on ancient civilizations, the symbol represents Viracocha and marks the point where the areas visited by the ancient gods start. A higher entity, the head of a population who could glide over water and fly, worshipped with different names throughout Central and Southern America, who had restored civilization after the Great Flood. Viracocha, however, did not resemble the people who inhabited the continent at the time. He did not have dark skin and wasn't clean-shaven, but was rather white-skinned and had a beard. Could he have been the survivor of an ancient, evolved civilization, today forgotten, who had escaped a worldwide catastrophe? The head of a small group with a technology not understood by those ancient populations? The ancient Paracas population lived around the Candelabrum area and were simple and peaceful people. They survived on fishing and rudimentary agriculture. They were skilled weavers and created beautiful painted ceramic ware. This lifestyle, however, is in sharp contrast to the practice they are mostly known for: drilling and deforming skulls. Deforming was achieved by wrapping the head of newborns with bandages or wooden boards, which compressed the bones of the skull to make them grow abnormally. This custom must have caused much pain. Nevertheless, it was practiced for an extremely long time, and it also spread to more distant lands like Egypt, Malta, and Central America. Ancient deformed skulls dating back more than 6,000 years were found in these areas. Today, the true reason behind this custom has yet to be discovered. Aesthetic reasons do not seem to justify its use, and the fact that it spread to civilizations which had no direct contact renders its expansion even more unfathomable. Other populations too practice deformities which today are considered abhorrent, like the Mayan custom to induce strabismus, or the Chinese to deform women's feet. But these habits have remained confined to those cultures without spreading to other populations like skull deformation has. This deformity was also considered a distinctive sign and performed only within the highest ranks. The Viracocha representations which have come down to us depict a being with a stocky bust, short legs, and especially big head. Could it be that deforming skulls was a way to resemble the gods? Ica is a town south of Lima. Its small museum holds an unsolved archaeological mystery. Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea was a doctor in the small town of Ica, loved and respected by the people all the more because he was a descendant of the city founders. He progressively transformed his doctor's surgery into a museum. Today, the 3 rooms hosting the museum hold about 11,000 stones, which weigh from a few grams to 500 kilos. These are carbonized andesites of volcanic origin and date back to the Mesozoic era. There are several incisions on their surface. The story starts in 1966, when a friend gave Cabrera a stone with the drawing of a prehistoric animal engraved. He discovered that it had been found next to the Ocukanje Desert and that there were many more. The stones had also generated some trading. In fact, the farmers would collect the stones and sell them to tourists as souvenirs. They told him that the stones had been brought to light in 1960 after the flooding of the Rio Ica. Cabrera was thunderstruck. Thereafter, the Peruvian doctor started to collect and study these stones with passion, a mission he pursued until his death in 2001. As he continued in his research, the doctor was increasingly convinced that the drawings carved on the stones were not just simple artistic creations, but some sort of ideographic writing. The images, in fact, were subdivided by Cabrera into subjects and illustrate the complex knowledge of more or less familiar subjects like astronomy and geography, but also more unusual, like surgery. The stones can therefore be rightfully considered as pages of a vast library. Their surfaces depict representations of body parts, heart transplants, maps of the entire planet which reveal how continents were millions of years ago, astronomers who study the passage of heavenly bodies, wagons drawn by horses, kangaroos, men with dinosaurs. But if dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, and it is thought that man's appearance on Earth only dates back a few million years ago, how can it be that they are depicted together on these stones? It is difficult to imagine that this civilization had reached the degree of knowledge represented in these scenes during such a distant era. Anatomy, in fact, was only born in the 1400s, while the first heart transplant only dates back to 1967. The knowledge that the Earth is round only goes back a few centuries BC. And the use of the telescope for astronomic studies is owed to Galileo Galilei in the 1600s. Horses became extinct thousands of years before they were reintroduced by the Spanish to the Americas in the 1500s. And the ancient inhabitants of Peru never used the wheel, while the pre-Columbian populations certainly did not know what kangaroos were. Are we faced with the greatest archaeological discovery of our times, or with a resounding fraud? Various archaeologists believe these are counterfeits, mainly created by a couple of campesinos to sell them to tourists. And this theory needs to take into account the following data. It is estimated that between the Cabrera finds, those owned by Peruvian collectors and those taken abroad, the amount of carved stones amounts to over 50,000 pieces. Now, that's an enormous amount, even for a tireless couple of forgers. In addition, many stones weigh several hundred kilograms. Why create such cumbersome souvenirs so hard to sell? And it is really hard to believe that two campesinos, barely able to read and write, could ever have acquired the scientific knowledge carved on the stones. The reporter Juan de Santa Cruz Pachacuti Yamqui, in an article of the 1500s, reports that the Incas would call them manco stones, meaning power stones, and these were part of the funerary vestiges of noble families based on an ancient tradition. This is confirmed by the fact that in August 1966, several samples were found in pre-Incaic tombs by the president of Lima's Polytechnic Institute, Mr. Santiago Agurto Calvo, and by the archaeologist Alejandro Petzia of the National Institute of Archaeology in Peru. The news appeared in December of the same year in the scientific supplement of a Lima daily newspaper. But the most sensational scientific fact derives from the lab analysis on the stones. Cabrera had them analyzed by the mining engineering company Mauricio Oschild and by the Mineralogy and Petrography Institute of Bonn University in Germany. Based on the oxidation layer, which covers the engravings, it seems that the stones were engraved at least 12,000 years ago. The Lima Aeronautic Museum, which owns about 60 samples, had the analysis repeated, and the data were confirmed. The engravings are at least 12,000 years old. Obviously, these are not the millions of years which can be surmised from the scenes with men and dinosaurs living together. Yet even 12,000 years ago, dinosaurs were already extinct, and we know of no civilizations of the time which had such advanced knowledge. According to Cabrera, this culture, which he called glyptolic civilization, disappeared due to a planet catastrophe caused by the wrong use of their own technology. Could they perhaps be survivors who created their engravings to hand down their knowledge and history to generations to come? It is also true that farmers can realize imitations, and there are many, but these are easy to unmask with tests. That's why the Inca stones remain an archaeological mystery with their fantastic representations. Brain transplants. Pyramid systems to transform solar energy and distribute it for use. Flying machines resembling strange mechanical birds. But human flight is one of the greatest breakthroughs of the modern age. Only some time ago, it was believed an impossible feat. And the use of the sun as a source of energy is also a recent victory. Who is this unknown population which emerges from the chasm of time with this sophisticated knowledge? The aspect of glyptolic men incredibly resembles the Viracocha depictions, especially the one found on the door of the sun in Tiahuanaco, on the shores of the Titicaca Lake in Bolivia. In fact, there's a man with stumpy legs, large belly and large head, out of proportion to his body. the same physical makeup of the glyptolic men. After all, Ica is next to the Candelabrum area inhabited by the Paracas, and in order to best underline their affiliation to the noble classes, they would deform skulls, perhaps to resemble the ancient Viracochas. The Paracas also perforated skulls, and on the Ica stones, the glyptolic men are depicted performing brain surgery. And yet, on the Paracas Peninsula, there's the Candelabrum, which, according to Zechariah Sitchin, indicates the beginning of the areas where Viracocha had lived with his group. And Ica is also next to the Nazca Plain, where there are large drawings only visible from the sky. Drawings which we find engraved in the Ica stones. Is this only a casual coincidence? Perhaps the Nazca Plain could add other elements to this research. The Pan-American Sur cuts through the vast Nazca Desert Plain with its drawings, which have engaged researchers from around the world in the attempt to explain the mystery, like a dark gash. The stretch between kilometer 419 and 465 passes right in the middle of the mysterious drawings, but from land, it is impossible to understand their true aspect. At first, only stones are visible, furrows which are not that deep, and clear spaces with different colors and undefined shapes. From the tower, 14 meters high, visibility improves only a little, yet over 200 drawings and almost 13,000 geometric figures are spread over its entire expansion. Only from above is it possible to realize the true essence of the shapes traced on the ground. The Nazca Plain is one of the planet's driest and most inhospitable. In fact, rainfall only amounts to 1 cubic centimeter per year, more or less a quarter of an hour of rain over a 12-month span. A real hellish, barren and stony land, but at the same time, the ideal place to trace images which can remain unchanged throughout the centuries.
These lands are quite unique. After penetrating the pampas and walking over them, you realize that even in 100 years' time, the same tracks will still be here because they are formed by a layer of ferrous stones which reflect the heat during the day, forming a vortex of hot air which does not allow sand to deposit, but moves it to the side. These stones are superficial, brown, and if trodden upon, you find that the white earth emerges, thus remaining permanently exposed. That's why these lines have kept visible all these centuries.
An ideal land to preserve the geometric figures in time, but it doesn't explain how the ancient inhabitants of the area, the Nazca, could draw them and trace kilometric lines, most of which are only visible from the sky.
Many drawings can easily be observed from the hilltops or mountains which surround the desert. Others, definitely big, cannot be seen from these heights. It is extremely hard, and since they can be observed as a whole only from above, the question is, how have they been created? We don't know. It's a mystery.
Hence, as Professor Adzabake claims, in order to have an overview of the larger drawings and direct the creative work, an overview was necessary and achievable only from the height of a sufficiently high hill. But on the plain, there aren't any. Therefore, that only leaves flight. But who had the capacity to fly over this plain centuries ago? The oral tradition of the Nazca speaks clearly. The Viracochas. The figures have been drawn with an accuracy which has baffled researchers who have examined them. The zoomorphic drawings have been traced with one continuous line, meaning with a technique which is even more difficult in terms of lines and geometries. One would think these are more recent, as they are more sophisticated, but on the contrary, they are more ancient. Therefore, the logic which states that human progress grows in time fails with the regression of technical capacity. How can this be explained? Perhaps the inhabitants of the plain ran out of crucial technical support. Oral tradition helps by reporting that suddenly the Viracachas left for an unknown destination. Could this be the right explanation? When they left, the Nazca found it impossible to trace other zoomorphic figures. So they were limited to continue drawing easier lines and geometric figures. Only in modern times did man understand what had been drawn in the Nazca Plain. An era when man had realized his ancient dream, to fly. The first to discover the true nature of the inexplicable furrows traced on the ground was the American geographer Paul Kosok in 1939, while he flew over the area with light aircraft. He tried to discover the mystery, guessing it was an astronomic calendar. But the most famous researcher who tried to unveil the mystery behind these lines was Maria Reiche, a German. The scholar, affectionately called the Lady of the Pampas, also fought hard to safeguard this extraordinary site, managing to have it proclaimed Patrimony of Humanity by UNESCO. In the city of Nazca, an association and a museum have been named after her. Her grave is in the garden of the museum.
It was an order by Mary to bury her body in a tomb which we keep in this museum. She wanted to be part of this area, feel surrounded and safeguarded by these lines and drawings.
Reiche dedicated her life to studying the drawings of the plain, starting in 1949, a passion which kept her going till the very end, in 1998, the year she died. Her conjecture is amongst those most highly esteemed.
There are many conjectures, but the most widely embraced is that by German doctor Maria Reich, who claims it is a large astronomic calendar used for agriculture.
Victoria Nikitsky lives in the town of Nazca and knew Reiche during the last years of her life, when the scholar had become blind and paralyzed in her bed. She writes promotional material on the drawings in the Nazca Plain and illustrates to tourists the wonderful work carried out by Maria Reiche by means of a simple plastic model.
The spider and the monkey are directly linked to the Big Dipper constellation in the case of the monkey and to the Orion constellation in the case of the spider. Both are connected to the summer solstice. This was how it was possible to forecast rainfalls.
A huge astronomic calendar. Is this the answer? But was such complexity really necessary only to achieve an astronomic calendar which, amongst other things, could be realized in a less colossal and laborious size? An astronomic calendar for agricultural use also surely had to be completed quickly for survival. But archaeologists speak of 1,500 years for its creation. In addition, why realize such a mammoth work which could only be seen from the sky, in flight? Without this capacity, the great majority of signs traced on the ground becomes inexplicable and therefore useless. Finally, many drawings, if subjected to computer inspections, find no astronomical reference whatsoever. Therefore, Reich's studies only partially unveil the Pampas mystery. And the enigmatic figure traced on the side of a small hill seems to look and salute someone in flight. But who flew in the distant past? A plot which thickens even more over the past few years with the discovery of other drawings and geometric figures in the close-by Palpa plain. The style is similar to the Nazca, but these date further back in time and are still only comprehensible from above, in flight. Finally, the Nazca and Palpa drawings cover a total area of nearly 600 square kilometers, and, to be created, thousands of tons of stones were shifted. Only a very important reason could justify any activity of this magnitude. The Antonini Educational Museum is in the town of Nazca, where many archaeological finds of the Nazca culture are kept, the last to have inhabited this land before the Incas, who incorporated them into their empire, cancelling out all their customs and traditions. The Nazca had reached an incredible artistic and cultural level, witnessed by the exquisitely painted ceramic ware and by the sophisticated and efficient underground aqueduct system they had built. There are no elements in these finds which help clarify the mystery of the origins and the significance of the drawings of the plain, except for one engraved stone found in the Nazca tomb. The workmanship is not as accurate as that of the Inca stones, and the drawings depict elements ascribable to the daily Nazca world. But why would the Nazca engrave stones when they were perfectly capable of painting exquisitely colourful ceramic ware and weaving finely embroidered blankets? Perhaps it was a way of responding to what they had seen in finds they believed to be of great importance, like the Inca stones. Once again, the engraved stones, which were considered stones of power, reappear. Or were they perhaps even stones of knowledge? Is there a true connection between the Inca and the Nazca? A 1586 report, written by Magistrate Louis de Monzon, explained what the plains natives said about the origins of the drawings. During extremely ancient times, a small group of people called Viracochas, who differed from the Indios, reached this land, and the Indios obeyed them, followed them, and realized roads which can still be seen today. The Viracochas suddenly left, but promised to return. A memory and a promise which was kept so alive in those people to deceive the Incas and Aztecs when they met the conquistadores for the first time. The Spanish were exchanged for the gods who had returned, thus allowing a handful of men to defeat well-trained and much more powerful armies. But, truthfully, who were the Viracochas? A myth, a legend, or a historical truth? Were they the true inspirers of the great civilizations of the past? Could the gods be the survivors of a remote and forgotten civilization which had reached a level of progress equal to or higher than the current one? The Monzon Chronicle and the engraved stone exhibited at the Antonini Museum add a new important detail to the other clues, and the ancient oral traditions seem increasingly less of a myth, of a legend, to become history. The Marcahuasi Meseta lies on top of a 4,200-meter mountain, 80 kilometers northeast of Lima. It is little known still today, also because in order to reach it, one has to organize a true expedition rather than a small trip. In fact, the final section of the road to reach San Pedro de Casta, the last inhabited center of the Meseta Valley, is a mule track which clambers up the sides of the mountain for about 30 kilometers, large enough for a car to pass. driving along the road at night without a guide who knows the place is an even more difficult task. In fact, a 5-hour trip is required to reach the small pueblo 3,200 meters up. Mass tourism, with its comforts, has not yet spoilt the primitive territory surrounding the plateau. Marcahuasi was discovered by the Peruvian archaeologist Daniel Russo de los Heros in the 50s. His research convinced him that there were some entrances to the mythical network of underground tunnels which crossed South America, and the ruins of sculptures realized in a distant era by an unknown and extremely evolved population, which he called Masma. Could it be another trace of the passage of the mythical Viracochas? In the small San Pedro de Casta Museum, there are many Meseta finds discovered by Russo. They come from a settlement of Incas who lived in Marcahuasi long before the disappearance of the mysterious Masma culture. Amongst the various types of finds, the mummies, with their facial expressions paralyzed in a moment of eternal terror. Perhaps they are the vestiges of Inca prisoners tortured during the Spanish conquest. But this is not a certainty. The unpaved small square of San Pedro is from where visitors to the plateau usually depart. The path leading to Marcahuasi is even more difficult than the one departing from the valley. It can only be covered by foot or with pack animals, which become even more indispensable when heavy, cumbersome luggage needs to be transported to the meseta at an altitude of 4,000 meters. From one of the highest points, the first ruins of the ancient Inca settlement can be seen, while further on there are even more. The meseta, in fact, takes its name from these ruins, one of the few Inca constructions to be built on 2 inhabitable floors, and the name Marcahuasi means exactly home with 2 floors. Daniel Russo de los Heros has studied the ruins of the meseta for 8 years in a row, stationing at the plateau for 6 months a year. The small hut where the archaeologist would camp is still in an excellent state and an obliged stopover for anyone visiting Marcahuasi. Manuel Olivares is an expert guide who knows the meseta inside out. He accompanied Russo during the last years when the archaeologists studied the Marcahuasi sculptures and cavities. Even today, Don Manuel acts as a guide to the very few tourists and researchers who adventure to the meseta.
En el año 52 llegó por primera vez Daniel Russo.
In 1952, Daniel Russo came here for the very first time, and we climbed to Marcahuasi. I worked with him for 8 years, 6 months a year. He would work a week in Lima and the other week in Marcahuasi. This was his job during those years.
Don Manuel still accompanies visitors to the meseta to settle into their campsite, a natural amphitheatre sheltered from the winds which blow over the plateau. From here, in order to reach a canal which Russo believed communicated with the mythical network of underground tunnels, connecting places hundreds of kilometers afar, at least an hour's walk is needed. The place is called Infernillo, meaning Little Hell, and the name exactly sums up what the natives think of this tunnel. The entrance to the canal is about 7 meters underground, and it can be reached by crossing a cleft between 2 gigantic rocks. When Russo used to work here, Manuel did lower himself down various meters. but the archaeologist feared for his safety and prevented him from continuing the descent. To reach the entrance, it is important to have mountain gear. Unfortunately, the heavy rainfalls which have hit the meseta have brought mud and silt which now block the entrance. To open it, suitable excavation equipment would be required with long working days. But the tunnels are not the only Markawazi enigma. The plateau is also the showcase of dozens of mysterious drawings found and catalogued by Ruzzo. The archaeologist claimed that the technique used by the Masma to carve the Markawazi rocks differs from any known to mankind. He defined it organic sculpture and believed it derived from extremely advanced knowledge, from a different way of viewing reality and representing shapes. A world where magical power and the earth and sky bond were of fundamental importance.
Son aproximadamente 32 figuras que se pueden encontrar.
About 32 drawings can be found in Markawazi.
Cada una despierta cierto.
And each one of these only piques the curiosity to discover how it was possible to realize them.
Pudieron hacer estas piedras.
In my personal opinion, it seems obvious that these were extremely well-prepared people with another type of mentality, a very special civilization with great knowledge.
Ruzzo discovered that in order to recognize the drawings carved in the rock, they should be viewed from the right distance and angle, under precise light and shade conditions, at the right time of day, and even right season of the year. Lacking these prerequisites, the sculptures are indecipherable. This rock was called the African lion by the scholar, and one can guess the profile only when looking from a certain perspective, exactly as explained by Ruzzo. If viewed from other angles, it shows no comprehensible shape. Identifying the sculptures is made even more difficult by natural erosion due to the enormous amount of time passed since their creation. The period surmised by Ruzzo dates back much further than the commonly accepted time, to extremely ancient eras over 10,000 years ago. An age which would have certainly transformed tools or handiwork left by the mysterious sculptors to dust, making any test currently available to date the drawings practically useless.
Bueno, esta es Markawazi.
This is Markawazi, and this is the Monument for Humanity. We have come here so that you can learn about it and the other drawings which are here.
The most famous work at Markawazi is the Monument for Humanity. Ruzzo had come up with this name, but its existence was already known by the indigenous population for a long time, and they called it the head of the Inca. It is 25 meters tall and is very eroded, but the profile is clearly human. Ruzzo discovered that by glancing at it from different angles and light conditions, other faces of various sizes belonging to all human races appeared on its surface. That's how it gained its current name, Monumento a la Humanidad. Other drawings can be seen from the plateau. Some are clearly identifiable. Others are hidden in the mysterious landscape of the meseta, awaiting the ideal conditions to unveil themselves to the eyes of observers. But many archaeologists did not agree on the artificial origin of the sculptures. They claimed that they were created by natural erosion and weather conditions. Fully convinced of his discovery, Ruzzo invited important researchers to visit and study the sculptures and data he had collected. The German, Albert Gleseke, the Frenchman, Marcel Homais, the Austrian archaeologist, Hans Schindler-Bellamy, and the Englishman, Peter Allen, all agreed with the theories supported by Ruzzo. Allen personally visited the Marcahuasi sculptures and was so impressed, he said, "The fact that they have this peculiarity implies an uncommon technique." Once more, the science world was divided into two opposite stands. Who was right? And once more, the usual question arose. Did the people who inhabited the Meseta in ancient times remember the origin of the finds in a place the Incas considered sacred? Pedro Cieza de León, Spanish reporter with the conquistadores, asked them if they knew who had created the strange shapes which were on the plateau. They replied that they belonged to men who came from afar, white-skinned foreigners with a beard. The imposing ruins of Chavin de Huantar are 3,200 meters high, lying between the mountains of southern Peru. They have been attributed to the Chavin culture, one of the most important in ancient Peru, considered the cultural root of the subsequent Andean civilizations. This culture developed suddenly in 1200 BC, and its influence spread to coastlines far from Peru. The entire complex of buildings is set towards east-west, amongst which the large temple which overlooks the entire site. It is called El Castillo and is built with various sized stone blocks with a more or less regular weight and shape. The walls were covered with large stone slabs, sometimes carved in the characteristic Chavin style. Similar carvings can be seen on the columns of the temple portal. And on several stone slabs of the ancient round square. The walls of the Castillo were adorned with over 200 stone heads, called hollow heads. Currently, only one has remained fixed in place. The others have been transferred to the small Chavin Museum.
Yes, here in the exhibition hall we have heads with proud faces, astonished faces. Research claims that these hollow heads show people who were in a trance state, in a hallucinatory state. These expressions would terrify the visitor who came to this area. The hollow heads were stuck, fixed to the walls of the main Chavin temple.
The Chavin population worshipped the jaguar god, and its religion originated from the atavic bond between man and the forest. A religion which, as the museum's director explains, terrified its believers with practices which probably utilized hallucinogenic substances. It seems strange, however, that a population with such a primitive religion had the knowledge to build the imposing Chavin structures. Could it be, perhaps, that the Chavin people had simply occupied pre-existing structures built by a population which had disappeared and had more advanced knowledge? The Castillo is also called Old Temple, but by looking carefully at it, rather than a temple, it looks like a giant strongbox. Its massive walls, in fact, do not have any windows, and inside there are no large worship halls. Underground, One of the galleries leads to a small, cross-shaped room where the most valuable and sacred Chavin work stands out. A granite monolith, 4.5 meters high, with a monstrous carved anthropomorphic figure revealing animal features. The style is typical of the Chavin population and represents the highest divinity of that ancient culture, the jaguar god. The monolith is called El Lanzón, the spear, and neither the passageway leading to it nor the narrow hall where it is placed were suitable to hold large worshipping crowds. But from a religious point of view, there is no sense in this. Usually, a divinity would be visited by a large number of people to be honored and worshipped. Its life-size reproduction can be admired in the garden of the Chavin Museum and leveled over a wall. The aspect of the jaguar god incredibly resembles the Viracocha depictions. Stumpy legs, large belly and large head, out of proportion to his body. Is this only a casual coincidence? Could it be another trace of the passage of the mythical Viracochas? It is possible to access an intricate underground network of corridors, halls, narrow tunnels, air ducts, and a water canalization from the open entrances at the top of the old temple and from others spread in various points. These are currently unusable, obstructed by debris and cave-ins. But once they connected the waters of the two rivers where Chavin de Huantar nestles in the middle. Huachexa overlooks Chavin and Mosna, which is at a lower height. The water descended from Huachexa and it would fill the large sunken square in front of the Castillo through its channels to finally flow in the Mosna. Could it be that such a sophisticated water network only had a ritual purpose? And could the Chavin underground be part of the legendary network of tunnels which connected ancient sites of a forgotten past? Mr. Lopez, archaeologist in charge of Chavin, states that there truly are underground tunnels which depart from Chavin towards other unexplored settlements of the surrounding mountains.
La gente antigua del pueblo de Chavin está hablando de...
The ancient Chavin population mentioned tunnels which connected an area northeast of here, about 2 kilometers away in the higher mountains.
Pero que está en una parte superior.
The ancient Chavin people spoke of this, so it is likely this connection truly exists.
For the first time, video cameras have entered the tunnels in Chavin, some of which are still unexplored. It's a difficult path, and the presence of bats makes it even less accessible. The network of underground tunnels is intricate, and the conjecture that the whole structure only had a religious purpose is increasingly less acceptable. Did the Chavin population really build the complex? Or did it simply settle in buildings it had found, readapting these to its requirements? Buildings constructed by a population which had disappeared and with more advanced knowledge. The American archaeologist Ephraim George Squire, in his book Peru, Incidents of Travel and Explorations in the Lands of Incas, published in 1887, believed that 2 distinct cultural eras existed in Peru's history. One, extremely ancient, with the most advanced scientific knowledge, and the other, much more recent, like that of the Incas, with a lower cultural level. According to Squire, an extremely hard to calculate span of time, but certainly broad, passed between these 2 cultures. He is also convinced that the ancient and sophisticated Peruvian finds are evidence of an advanced technology, heritage of a forgotten humanity. The tunnels unwind for still unknown distances, also due to the danger of covering them. Many are damaged or obstructed, and in fact, in the end it becomes impossible to continue. Luckily, there are side exits which suddenly emerge from the large main square. The tunnels and the entire Chavin complex still remain an unsolved mystery, and the uncertainty of their real origins is increasingly more substantiated. Who really built these? Professor Walter Krickeberg, in his book Alto American Cultures, sustains the most ancient and advanced pre-Columbian civilizations appear suddenly, apparently without any roots and preliminary stages. This can only be explained by an external impulse which influenced ancient America. An external impulse. Exactly what has been orally narrated by the ancient pre-Columbian populations. The Viracochas, men of great knowledge and with extraordinary powers, with their white skin and beards, gave birth to civilization once more after the Great Flood.